All right, so today we're diving into the story of a king whose name is pretty much synonymous with, well, failure. Imagine this. You inherit a kingdom that's actually on the right track, but you mess it up so badly that your story becomes this timeless warning about power, pride, and what happens when you just refuse to listen. We're talking, of course, about King Jehoiakim.
And really, his entire story boils down to this one big question. What does happen when a leader gets all this power handed to them, but totally rejects any kind of wisdom? Jehoiakim had every advantage you could think of. His story really makes you wonder, right? Is leadership just about your family name and your title? Or is it about who you are, about character, about justice? Okay, let's get into it. So to really get a handle on Jehoiakim, we've got to start with how he even got the crown. Because here's the thing, he wasn't some sovereign ruler who won it through strength or because everyone loved him. No, he was a compromised figure from the get-go. The context here is just fascinating. Jehoiakim's dad, Josiah, was this amazing reformer, a really good king. But after he dies, the Egyptian pharaoh, a guy named Necho II, just sweeps in, kicks Jehoiakim's brother off the throne, and puts Jehoiakim there instead. So right from day one, his reign begins under the shadow of a massive foreign empire.
And this little detail just perfectly illustrates his situation. The pharaoh doesn't just make him king. He changes his name from Eliakim to Jehoiakim. And let me tell you, that was not an honor. It was like a brand of ownership. It was a big public announcement that the king of Judah was now a vassal, basically a puppet whose strings were being pulled by Egypt.
So what does this brand new puppet king do with his power? Does he try to live up to his father's legacy of justice? Nope, not even close. He immediately pivots to corruption, greed, and just making himself rich at the expense of his own people. The prophet Jeremiah's words, they are just scathing. He's not being subtle here. He's directly accusing the king of building these ridiculously lavish palaces with forced, unpaid labor. This wasn't just some bad economic policy. It was a deep moral and spiritual crime. The king's personal desire for luxury was literally built on the suffering of his people.
The contrast could not be more stark, right? His father, Josiah, spent his reign trying to renew the covenant and make sure the poor were treated fairly. Jehoiakim, he dedicated his reign to pure luxury, building these fancy cedar-paneled palaces funded by oppressing his own subjects.
And this brings us to a really crucial idea, a covenant breach. See, in Judah, a king's right to rule wasn't absolute. It was conditional. It was based on upholding justice, on following the rules laid out in their covenant. So Jehoiakim wasn't just being a bad king, he was fundamentally breaking the very terms of his own authority.
So this all leads us to the dramatic climax of his story, an act of such incredible arrogance and defiance that it basically sealed his fate and the fate of his entire kingdom. Okay, picture the scene. It's 605 BC. A scroll shows up at the palace from the prophet Jeremiah, and this isn't a friendly letter. It contains a dire warning. Because of the king's injustice, the rising empire of Babylon is going to come and just destroy Judah. This is a direct message, maybe the last chance for him to turn things around. You can just feel the tension in the room. The words of the prophecy are being read out loud to the king and all his officials. They're all just sitting there, warming themselves by a fire, while this warning of total national catastrophe echoes around the royal chamber. So what does he do? Does he listen? Does he maybe get a little nervous? Does he even for a second consider that, hey, maybe the prophet has a point? No. In an act of just stunning contempt, he takes a scribe's knife, methodically cuts the scroll up into pieces, and throws it, column by column, into the fire. He just sits there and watches until the divine warning is nothing but ash. This right here is the point of no return. And you know what? Jehoiakim's moral arrogance was perfectly matched by his political incompetence. He was caught in this geopolitical vice, right between the fading power of Egypt and the rising might of Babylon. And his pride just wouldn't let him navigate it wisely.
This timeline really shows his political whiplash. He starts out as Egypt's guy, but then, in 605 BC, Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon crushes the Egyptians. So seeing which way the wind is blowing, Jehoiakim switches his loyalty to Babylon, but only for a couple of years, before he makes the incredibly foolish decision to rebel against them too. His strategy wasn't a strategy at all. It was just pure, short-sighted opportunism. And it was rooted in the exact same arrogance that made him burn the scroll, this fatal miscalculation that he could somehow play these giant empires against each other. Instead, all he did was paint a giant target on his own back for the most powerful man in the world, Nebuchadnezzar.
And so, predictably, every warning he had laughed off, every prophecy he had literally burned, started to come true with chilling, perfect accuracy.
And Jeremiah didn't just predict a disaster for the nation. No, he predicted a specific, humiliating end for the king himself. For a monarch whose whole legacy is tied up in getting an honorable burial, this was the ultimate curse. You're going to get dragged out and dumped like a dead animal.
And that's pretty much what happened. In 598 BC, just as the Babylonian army he had provoked was starting to surround Jerusalem, Jehoiakim dies. His reign didn't end in glory. It ended in a disaster that he, and he alone, created. But the consequences didn't just stop with his death. Oh no. His personal failure had a catastrophic domino effect on the entire royal dynasty, the sacred line of King David.
Look at how fast everything falls apart after him. His son, Coniah, is on the throne for a whopping 3 months before he's hauled off into exile. Then his uncle Zedekiah is put in charge as the very last king before Jerusalem is completely destroyed and the monarchy collapses. The whole dynasty just shatters, exactly like Jeremiah had warned.
So this is his legacy. It's just tragic. He was handed a kingdom that was on a path to justice, and he chose luxury. He was given crystal clear warnings, and he answered with defiance. He was facing a complex political crisis, and he made every single wrong move, leaving absolutely nothing but ruin in his wake.
And that leaves us with this final question to think about. Jehoiakim's story is this powerful, ancient case study that really suggests that true authority, the kind that actually lasts, isn't something you just inherit like a crown. It's something that has to be earned day after day through justice, wisdom, and, a little bit of humility.